we are recording. So this will include me finding your script, which you emailed to me. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Or shared as Google Doc.
I see it. December 17, 2025. That's not right. Why does it say that? Man. Boom.
Okay.
Hey, Jake.
Hello. Welcome back to Well, hang on. How are we starting this?
I mean, that sounded fine.
Just like with hellos, or welcome back to Like, do we want to do the formal kind of?
Oh, I don't know. Whatever you want to do. Take the lead.
Welcome back to Signal Flares on Capitol Square. The date is December 19, 2025. We've got about 2 weeks left in the year, 1 week till Christmas, and we're maybe halfway through Hanukkah to our Jewish friends. Andrew, how are you?
I'm thriving, but barely surviving, unfortunately.
Okay. Better than the alternative. I think we should start with a bit of spot news today. Andrew, you've been watching some tax bills that the governor has on the docket. What is he doing today, and why do we care?
So this is interesting in that we're recording this 2 hours before the governor is supposed to sign a few property tax bills, 1 hour before he's maybe supposed to sign some other bills too. It's kind of all coming to a head here.
Spoilers.
But it's a package of bills. They are, I mean, I guess I can number them. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Nobody cares about that anyways. But it's essentially $2 to $3 billion of future property tax cuts are going to be in this by limiting how much tax bills can rise automatically as a result of rising property values. There's some other stuff in there as well that's meant to basically address this problem we've had recently where after real estate prices went up a whole lot in the last 5 years, a lot of people saw large tax increases on their bills as a result. The law is supposed to prevent increases from translating to large tax bill increases too. It didn't really happen, and so they made some changes to try to prevent that. So property tax stuff, that's what's in there.
Let's cut to the chase here. What is going to happen to my property tax bill? Number go up, number go down?
Unfortunately, the answer depends, so I can't give you a clear response. Probably nothing. It will be more likely to apply in rural and exurban areas. In Columbus, we have these nice high property taxes that people have approved, so I'm guessing it'll probably stay the same.
You know, maybe this is a bigger question than we have time for right now, but if you can't answer that question clearly, how is anyone supposed to politically capitalize on this issue?
By taking the $2 billion number that I said at the very beginning of this and literally say nothing else. If this were an ad, this would have been like a 10-second conversation.
Well, I'm hiring you as my political consultant. What do we got next?
Oh, that's a great question. What do we have next?
Marijuana.
Okay, we're a little unprepared. It's been hectic. So is there something happening with marijuana, Jake?
Yes, and the reason why it seems like we're a bit unprepared here is because the time at the hour is about noon, and in what we believe and what sources are indicating is 1 hour, the governor is going to sign what is far and away the biggest update to drug policy in Ohio since Ohio voters legalized recreational marijuana in 2023. I'll just run us through some of the basics here. For marijuana, you will still be able to possess, consume, grow your own marijuana. So broadly, what the voters approved in 2023 is still go. Although there are new caps on dispensaries. There are criminal penalties around the transportation of marijuana if you fail to keep it in its original unopened packaging in the trunk of your car. The bill makes several references to the unopened packaging. So there's some new ways that you can get tripped up. You know, you can buy marijuana legally from a store and find yourself violating criminal laws in Ohio under this bill. The bill also moves all sales of intoxicating hemp, which is a drug that comes from the same cannabis plant. It gets you high like marijuana does, largely through a legal loophole that is not even worth getting into here on this.
Well, that's why I like to use the air quotes when I say intoxicating hemp.
Intoxicating hemp. But that will now be sold in dispensaries like marijuana. It will have to directly compete with marijuana. It'll have to pay the taxes marijuana does, with the exception of intoxicating hemp being, quote, drinkable cannabinoid products, which is a reference to intoxicating hemp in beverage form. Those sellers will be able to continue to sell in bars and in retail locations until the end of 2026, when federal legislation kicks in that effectively bans its sale, although there's interest at the federal and state levels of finding some way to circumvent that even in the future. So sources are saying right now that Governor DeWine is going to just sign the bill and move on with his day. We won't know that until the check clears, so stay tuned.
All right. Is there There's another bill hanging out there, right?
There is, and this one's more of a mystery. So, Andrew, what is this voting bill, and what, if anything, do we know about what DeWine is going to do here?
Well, so this is like some live news reporting happening, but I texted a lobbyist about this who's following this issue, and they said they have no idea what's going to happen with it. So this is a bill that it would do a lot of stuff. Some of it has to do with checking the voter rolls and whether people who are in there are citizens or not. There's been a big focus on that by Republicans, even though there's no real evidence that non-citizens are voting in large numbers, although Republicans would just then say, like, well, do you think non-citizens should be able to vote? Like, you don't think it's a problem? Like, it's very, it's a rhetorical trap, I guess, to fall in, like, very easily. But they've been very worried that, if nothing else, let's just say that maybe the illegal, undocumented people could be voting, and so this would prevent that. That's kind of like the idea.
Well, let me add in here. Some of these people are documented. We're talking about green card holders, right?
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the way more common scenario that somebody's allowed legally to be here. They have permanent residence, and they, check the wrong box or whatever. But that being said, the big thing here is that currently, if you want to vote by mail, you have to get your ballot in the mail the day before the election happens, and then the state will still count your vote as long as it arrives at the elections office 4 days after election day. Basically Friday, I think, is how that counts out. This bill would eliminate that post-election day grace period, which would mean realistically you could still mail your absentee ballot the day before, but you kind of gotta really hope that the post office is on their game and they'll get it there the next day, because otherwise it won't count. And so there are thousands of people every major election that vote this way whose ballots are counted after Election Day. Those people will either have their votes not count, or they'll have to change when they mail their ballots out. So that's a pretty big deal.
Is there any telling yet, or when a law like this takes effect, do voters just change their behavior and vote earlier, or do votes end up not get counted and procrastinators end up effectively disenfranchised?
So I'll say I'm not really aware of. Ohio has fairly liberal voting laws. And I'm not really aware of a state with fairly liberal voting laws restricting voting subsequently in the way that Ohio has. So I just don't know if there's data out there to show whether that's the case. I kind of suspect not. I imagine that people who are late sending these in just procrastinated, and they'll just still procrastinate. But I know that lawmakers believe that people kind of get the picture and mail them early. I'll say there's been a shift away generally from mail voting. I think, just speaking for myself, I was pretty alienated by the Postal Service during the pandemic. I didn't really like the idea that I would mail something and it's this important and it wouldn't show up until a week or 2 weeks later. So between that and stuff that Donald Trump's been saying for years about mail voting, there's just been a shift away from it in general. So maybe this won't have as big of an effect. But anyway, the thing is that we don't know if DeWine's going to sign it or not. He said a few years ago when he signed the last package of voting restrictions that he basically thought it was a settled issue. He didn't want to see this anymore, and basically telegraphed to the legislature, if you pass any more of these, I'm going to veto them. Whether or not that means that he will now actually follow through on that remains to be seen.
And for the record, Andrew and I recently had a chance to ask the governor about this at a press conference. I believe it was Nick Evans from the Ohio Capital Journal. Asked him, is he going to sign the bill? And DeWine just completely disregarded the question and did not answer it. So we did what we could. We fought the good fight there. And just to recap for listeners, so tax bills going to be signed. Marijuana bill, sources say it will be signed today. Remains to be seen. Voting rights bill, who even knows when? Apparently the deadline is tomorrow, so you will just have to check back on signalohio.org on that one. With the nuts and bolts out of the way, Andrew, you have kind of a mammoth story that has it published yet?
It is. I don't think it's published still. So
by the time this is on your YouTube or in your earballs, you will be on it. Tell us what's in the story. I'm very sorry for my use of earballs.
Yeah, I was wondering, you're trying to coin a new phrase there. I liked it. So, Jake, you've done a lot of reporting on data centers this year about how they've been using tons of electricity, how the people who run the electrical grid are worried there won't be enough electricity to accommodate for them. If you've ever seen a data center, they're just a totally massive building. I mean, football stadium size structures that use as much electricity as a small to medium sized city. I mean, it is. I don't think that our electrical system had this in mind when it was set up. I mean, this is just exponentially more power than we're sort of supposed to be able to handle. And so these things have been getting built in Ohio at a pretty high rate. We now have the fifth most in Ohio of data centers of any state in the U.S. And There have been complaints about these things for a while. They get a lot of property tax and sales tax breaks that translate to it's worth billions of dollars to this industry. The idea is that it's an economic development project. Construction trades love this because it's billions and billions and billions of dollars of construction that's just continuously happening. But people have been concerned that there's not that many permanent jobs with these places. I saw an episode of Silicon Valley. That's how I think of these, where the characters are touring a data center in San Francisco, and there's one engineer showing them around, and then they lose the engineer, and they're just wandering around in an empty building for not hours, but it's kind of like the joke is that there are very few people who actually are in these things. It's just a bunch of computers and like a handful of people who make sure they're operating the right way. And there's like security guards and stuff like that too. But so, yeah, like people were saying, why are we giving these things all these breaks when they don't really create that many permanent jobs? So that kind of being the backdrop, I've noticed that this year especially that more and more communities that are seeing these data center projects being proposed for their areas, there's usually a rezoning ordinance that has to be passed or something like that. These meetings are like standing room only. There are people showing up wearing matching shirts. There's Facebook groups being formed. And then in multiple communities, there were residents started organizing referendum campaigns to try to block these things from being put in the first place. So we saw in one community, Jerome Township here in Columbus, the township trustees imposed a 9-month moratorium saying that we're not going to approve any data center projects during this time. We saw a community, Lordstown, which is like a village that people know for the large former GM plant that used to be there in the Youngstown area. They actually passed a ban on data centers in response to these. I kind of feel like they were facing some political heat and kind of maybe, I'm just speculating now, but they voted out the day before the election. So maybe, make from that what you will. But after the developer behind that sued, they converted a moratorium like the one in Jerome Township. And then I wrote about another one in Preble County, which is like on the Indiana border, where residents basically were organizing one of these things and the developer pulled their application. So I thought it was really interesting that there's been a critique of these things for a long time. Nobody really likes having a giant construction site in their backyard. But it's just really tipped over into something else, this year. And it's starting to look like a political issue to me, not just like a local, like I don't want X thing in my backyard anymore.
Mm-hmm. Did you hear anything about the noise? I hear these are noisier than is appreciated.
That's one of the complaints that they did here. I've actually never driven by one of these things. Well, I've driven by them, but I've never gotten close enough and like craned my ear to see what I hear. But noise pollution, I mean, it's just like natural gas plants, like solar plants, data centers. It's the kind of thing that is getting built in Ohio in an empty space, and there are people who live by it, and nobody wants to live by something like that. It's just like local government 101. It's not in my backyard kind of stuff. But there's more to it here, and I think it's because people are becoming aware of the relationship that this strain that data centers are putting on the electrical grid, how that translates to likely an increase in electricity bills. That answer is a little bit more complicated, I guess, to really kind of like pull apart, but we're talking billions and billions of dollars of so like maybe $3 billion is the number that were approved in Ohio last year that were in basically they call them transmission upgrades, but essentially like new electrical lines and stuff like that. So somebody's paying for it. Power companies are allowed to, they call it socialize the cost, but basically pass it along to everybody who buys electricity in an electricity network. So, and we saw actually over the summer, electric bills went up by average of $16 per month. So we think that, or a lot of people think that that's because of these data centers. So Amazon issued a study that said they're not making people's bills go up at all.
Well, there you have it.
I guess that settles it, right? There is an argument to be made, which is that when a giant new customer comes in, they are buying more power. And so hypothetically, that could cause the actual price people pay per kilowatt hour to go down because it's kind of spreading out the use in an existing system among kind of like a large new user. What that excludes is how that assumes that there's capacity in the current grid to like absorb the use. And it's building the capacity that costs more money. And it's even like not having capacity where you have to suddenly start, I don't know how markets work, but do weird stuff to find more power available. So that I think it oversimplifies some of those kinds of things. But again, it's just such a complex issue. All I know is that there's a lot of people who think that this is why prices are going up. And it certainly makes sense that there would be some kind of implication. We're talking about tripling, quadrupling the power usage in the country because of data centers or whatever, or quadrupling the power usage that data centers are now employing compared to what it was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And if I may add from my side of the mountain here, one thing that's interesting to me watching this from a distance over the years is that Ohio communities, I'd say less so communities, but a playbook ran by lawyers and consultants has emerged for how to oppose data centers and how to leverage Ohio's laws. I'm sorry, not data centers, solar farms, to shut down these solar farms from being built. It's the same NIMBY energy. And I would argue that solar is sort of coded as a liberal Democrat issue in Ohio. And the converse would be true for data centers. They're sort of coded. Republican politicians love taking pictures and celebrating these data centers as they open. And it'll be interesting seeing what happens when this playbook shifts from this liberal coded target to a Republican coded target.
Well, what's interesting about that is that I interviewed the township trustee from Jerome Township, which is the community that was the first one, as far as I know, in Ohio to have one of these moratoriums on data centers. And she's a Republican. She's running for the state house, I think, with Jim Jordan's endorsement. Like, this is not a liberal politician or anything like that. And she was talking about how people in her community view the tax exemptions that these things get as corporate welfare. And, I do think that while there's definitely elements in Donald Trump's sort of coalition now of like Silicon Valley tech bros, like that kind of thing, there's also a lot of people on the right who don't like big tech. They were really worried about how, content moderation policies worked back in the pandemic era. I think that you see that industry kind of like throw in with kind of probably following where the shifting political winds are going, but I don't know that all of their voters are going along with them. So, but I think that even when you get outside of like this, what codes is left versus right, nobody wants to see their electrical bills go up. And there are people like Steve Bannon who are kind of railing against this stuff. So it's interesting to me, like whether this tips over into being something that candidates really talk a lot about and kind of becomes like a campaign issue. But yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing I'll say about this before we wrap up is that I interviewed a developer who said some stuff about his specific project, but the quote that story ends with is basically like, these data centers have to go somewhere. So I use AI tools to help write and research my story. Just like what that looks like. It's not like I'm saying, hey, ChatGPT, write me an article, but it's like sometimes it's stuff like, hey, I'm trying to like find a source for this that I've heard about. Sometimes it's like, hey, this sentence kind of sucks. Can you help me come up with some ideas to like rewrite it? So, we need these things on some level. There's a debate in society about how many we need and how much of this is like a good idea to invest in the level that's being invested. But yeah, that's something I wanted to say too, is that data centers, which are out there because of AI and cryptocurrency, also it's just like an integral part of our society too. So yeah, I guess it's something that we can't live with. That we maybe don't love living with them, but I don't know if we can live without them either. So
we will see what 2026 has to bring. We are getting a little bit short on time, so let's just keep this snappy. But we want to talk about DeWine, Houston, Amy Acton, Vivek Ramaswamy. Andrew, the governor, had some interesting comments at his press briefing. I believe it was last week now. What did he say? Why do we care?
So we all sat down with the governor for a Christmas holiday season breakfast. It's at the governor's mansion. Fran DeWine has ornaments that she passes out. She talks about the Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. The governor's dog is in the room. There's probably wood crackling on a fireplace somewhere. But besides all of that, the governor fields questions and is usually a little more relaxed at these things. And so I asked him about Amy Acton. She is his former state health department director. She's running for governor as a Democrat, mind you. And the whole Republican line on her is that they actually use the phrase COVID queen, saying that she closed down schools during the pandemic. Like, how dare her, and now she wants to be governor. She's not qualified. And of course, like, the thing that I think is funny about that is that a bureaucrat can't close down things. Like, the governor made the decisions. So I asked DeWine what he thinks about that. And he basically didn't answer the question, but he did say that the buck stops with me. I made these decisions. I think that the governor's a loyal person, and I don't think he wants to throw Amy Acton under the bus, but I also know he's going to have a lot of like political reasons to do that anyways. So I just think it's kind of a weird thing that Republicans are saying, hey, we need another Republican governor because somebody who served in the last Republican administration, or did something that we don't like. And that's kind of what it boils down to. And I just think that's kind of silly.
Mm-hmm. What I found interesting was the governor said, he almost took the Ronald Reagan, thou shalt not speak ill of a fellow Republican. I am going to endorse whomever the Republican candidate is. But when it got into the Amy Acton stuff, it struck me that he was talking less about a political candidate and more as like, this is someone I hired for a job and I oversaw. I am not going, it seemed like he would attack Amy Acton, the candidate, but he is not just going to disparage his own employee for work that she did under his administration.
And then, part of this whole thing is that DeWine's also talking about, it sounds like Vivek Ramaswamy is kind of courting an endorsement from him. So this guy who made these catastrophic errors in some of the most important decisions of his term. Also, I'd love to have your support. It's just kind of funny, and that's just how politics works. It's not surprising or anything like that, but it's silly.
And Andrew, a poll came out recently. The powers that be rejected my fun little pun of John Husted. Explain that pun, why it's so funny. Explain my brilliance. Where do you want to go with this?
Well, Jake, you're just truly a comedic genius, but. So the basis for the joke is that a poll came out last week, and, we kind of shrug our shoulders at polls here in Ohio. They've been super wrong for years. They've been right-ish lately. So they've gone from super wrong to right-ish, but, they are, take them what they are. But the thing I thought was interesting in this particular one was it showed John Husted narrowly leading. It was actually within the margin of error, but over Sherrod Brown, the Democrat former senator who's challenging him this year. But they asked the voters about the different candidates. What do you think about these people? It was 5 or 6 names, people like Mike DeWine, J.D. Vance. And the answer for John Husted, the most common answer was, I don't know. It was the most common. It was the most. He was the most unknown person of the 6 names that they were asked about. And if you're a politician, it can't feel great when you've kind of put your life into kind of building your brand and kind of running on your name, and then you kind of this is your big moment to run for election, for a high-profile race, and the people of Ohio have no idea who you are. And yeah.
And this person we're talking about was the Speaker of the House. Since 2001, he's been in public office.
Yeah.
Is that right? He was the Speaker of the House. He was the Secretary of State. He was the Lieutenant Governor. He is a U.S. Senator. I mean, he is one of the most powerful people in the country after 20-plus years of public service, and people just seem to not know who he is, which is really a feat.
Yeah, and I asked him about that, and he's probably right in that he says, well, I don't know that it'd be a great thing for you to be known as the guy who's been around forever. The thing is that he has been around forever, so he doesn't have the advantage of being an outsider who is going to come in and shake things up. But in a state that kind of tends to vote Republican, the generic Republican is probably better than the controversial Republican, I would imagine. It'll be interesting to see whether or not that's the case. We have Vivek Ramaswamy next year, who's going to kind of prove the real life kind of test of that idea. And in contrast, the guy who's running against Husted, Sherrod Brown, was quite well known. He was the second most well known person of the 6 names, and it is kind of weird where we have the incumbent in this really important office nobody knows, and then the challenger to this office everybody knows. I don't know how that shakes out.
And the Republican line against Sherrod Brown has always been, this man has been in office for 25 years. I'm the young Republican, and I think Bernie Moreno said I was in diapers when Sherrod Brown was first winning public office, and now you have 2 guys who have that political problem of having been around forever, but only one of them seems to have reaped the benefits of that name ID. So what a race.
Yeah. And so Sherrod Brown, he's out there basically criticizing Husted for everything that's happening in D.C., and whether or not that works, I think, will depend on whether voters kind of associate Husted with the stuff that's kind of going on in the country. So it's just, it's a thing. We'll see.
Well, we have one item left for today, and we figured we'd do something special for the dozens of listeners and viewers that we believe are out there. Many, many dozens.
Many.
So we're gonna do some predictions. I actually had a different prediction, but something Andrew was just riffing on gave me a much better idea. Here's my take. I think next year there will be a preemption bill coming out of the State House that forbids Ohio cities from banning these data centers. A few of them have been popping up in central Ohio, and often when this happens, when the generally liberal cities get these sort of progressive ideas and start executing on them, whether you're talking about guns, tobacco, puppies, cell towers, these are all real examples.
Not just random nouns that you're just
No, these are all things that Ohio cities have tried to legislate and problems they've tried to solve in their communities. And then you have a legislature coming in and essentially just saying, we declare that this is a state issue and cities have no constitutional right to legislate it. The courts have been generally deferential to the legislature on these issues, so they sort of just gradually bring the walls in on what sorts of things cities can address. My prediction for 2026 is that a preemption bill passes in some form around data centers. Andrew, what is going to happen next year?
I have a lukewarm take.
Lukewarm take.
Yeah, I'm really like pumping this thing up, but I think that 26 is going to be like 2018 in terms of there being a strong Democratic wave in the country. You know, there's been a lot written about because of how gerrymandering has happened, whether or not that will actually mean that Democrats will pick up a bunch of seats in the U.S. House. I guess, you know, so basically there are questions about the extent to which this will translate towards victories. I don't think it's super likely, for example, too, that like a Democrat's going to win election to the Senate in Montana or something like that. So it's going to be kind of like limited. So then the question then is, here in Ohio, will that mean that Democrats will actually win anything? I think that's kind of like the big question for their party right now, you know, permanently until we kind of see otherwise. So I don't want to go out on a limb and like say like, you know, Democrats are sweeping the statewide races or anything like that. We'll see how good of a year it is for them, but I think it's going to be a very good year. I think this is going to be the best chance they have for a long time.
Are we going to learn anything useful from the primaries from Democrats, or are we just going to have to wait till the general?
I don't know enough about other states. I know there's like a really hot Democratic primary in Michigan, for example. So I think some of these other states will probably provide a better answer on that than we will see here in Ohio. I guess like the one thing that comes to mind is that the Secretary of State's race features Brian Hambly, who's a doctor from the Cincinnati area, who is kind of self-funding his campaign. He's like, I would say he appears to be kind of like normal, like prosperous, not like self-funded, you know, millionaire candidate, kind of rich. So maybe he'll have, you know, enough of a, you know, bang behind his campaign. He's running against Allison Russo, who's an established politician here from the Columbus area. So I think if there is a test case and a Democratic primary, that might be the best example we have of a outsider running against kind of like a moderately unknown insider. But yeah, it's hard to say.
Well, I believe that's all we have here from Signal Flares on Capitol Square. I'm one of your hosts, Jake Zuckerman.
I'm the other one of your hosts, Andrew Tobias.
And to our dozens and dozens of listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. Look out for more in 2026.
All right. How long was that?
I don't know. I forgot to set my watch to time it.
It didn't seem like it was that long.
No, I was trying to push the pace.
27 minutes.